It happened in the dead of night, January 3rd, 2026. While most of us were still asleep, an absolutely stunning military operation was kicking off, one that would send shockwaves across the entire planet and maybe, just maybe, rewrite the rules of modern warfare.
And then the confirmation came, not from some formal press conference, but from a post on President Trump's Truth Social account. It was blunt, direct, and to the point. The U.S. military had captured the narco-terrorist Nicolás Maduro. And just like that, the world woke up to the news that a sitting head of state had been taken into custody by a foreign power.
So yeah, this one single event, kicking off in Caracas, Venezuela, it raised some pretty profound questions. Let's dive in and unpack exactly how this all went down.
This was Operation Absolute Resolve, and to really get it, we need to first look at the anatomy of this incredibly high-stakes raid.
Okay, so let's just break down the basics. The targets were President Nicolás Maduro and his wife Celia Flores. And this wasn't just one branch of the military going in. We're talking a joint force of U.S. Special Ops, the CIA, and even the FBI's elite hostage rescue team. The result? It was decisive. Both Maduro and Flores were captured and flown right out of the country.
And the sheer scale of this thing, it's just staggering. We're talking about 150 U.S. aircraft. Now, this was not some quiet, sneaky surgical strike. No, this was a massive, coordinated assault. F-22 Raptors, B-1B Lancers, waves of Special Ops helicopters. The strategy was clearly to go in with overwhelming force.
And this right here? This just perfectly illustrates how tactically successful that strategy was. According to reports, 56 Venezuelan and Cuban personnel were killed, including many of Maduro's own personal guards. And on the U.S. side, zero. Zero fatalities reported, just a couple of minor injuries. It's a really stark contrast that shows you just how intense the fight was for the people defending.
But the final move in this operation didn't happen on a battlefield. It happened in a courtroom. After being captured, Maduro was flown directly to New York. And just a few days later, there he was pleading not guilty to narco-terrorism charges in a Manhattan federal court. Think about that. From a presidential palace to a U.S. federal holding cell in less than 72 hours.
So you have to be asking, how on earth did we get to this point? I mean, an operation this big doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It was really the final step after years of escalating tension.
This timeline really lays out the whole path. You can trace it all the way back to 2020 when the Justice Department first indicted Maduro during Trump's first term. Then you fast forward to 2024, Maduro claims victory in an election that almost everyone called fraudulent. By August of 2025, the U.S. starts a huge military buildup in the Caribbean. A few months later, that escalates to a full-on maritime blockade, with the U.S. seizing oil tankers. And then, just one day before the raid, President Trump goes public and says strikes are coming. This was, in a way, an operation that was announced ahead of time. Now, the political justification for all of this was a huge shift in U.S. foreign policy, something called the Trump Corollary. This was basically a new add-on to the historic Monroe Doctrine, the one that told European powers to stay out of the Americas. This new version asserted a U.S. willingness to use direct military force to secure the Western Hemisphere. And Operation Absolute Resolve? Well, it was the first major test of that new doctrine.
And we really can't ignore a core motivation that the administration itself was very, very clear about. Way back in 2023, Donald Trump said this out loud. Venezuela was about to collapse. We would have taken over it and kept all that oil. So, access to Venezuela's massive oil reserves was never some secret objective. It was a stated goal.
So, with Maduro gone, what happens now? What's next for the country he ruled? Well, that brings us to Venezuela's incredibly uncertain future, a nation that's basically been left in limbo.
And that leaves us with the most immediate, the most critical question of all. Who is actually running Venezuela right now?
And right here, you see the fundamental conflict. On one side, you have President Trump saying, we are going to run the country until we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. And on the other, you have Delcy Rodríguez, who was sworn in as acting president, firing back. Venezuela will never again be anyone's colony. It is a head-on collision over sovereignty and who is in control. And at the very heart of this whole conflict are some immense stakes. We're talking about 300 times billion barrels of proven oil reserves. That's the largest in the entire world. Control over Venezuela means having huge influence over the global energy market.
So how would you even start to fix Venezuela's totally collapsed oil industry? Well,
Experts have basically laid out a two-phased plan. In the short term, say 1 to 2 years, you could maybe add 500,000 barrels a day just by fixing up existing wells. But the long-term solution, the one that gets production anywhere near its peak, that requires tens of billions of dollars in at least 5 years to build or refurbish the really sophisticated facilities needed to process Venezuela's heavy crude.
But, and this is a huge but, getting that kind of investment is a massive challenge. International companies aren't just going to rush in with their checkbooks. They need political stability, they need to know their people and their equipment will be safe, they need credible legal guarantees, and maybe most importantly, they have to get over the country's long history of just seizing foreign assets. These are enormous hurdles to clear.
Okay, finally, let's zoom all the way out. What does this action really mean for the rest of the world? Has the United States just set a brand new global precedent?
This analysis from Special Eurasia puts it pretty bluntly. They say this represents a return to high-risk, kinetic, which just means physical, forceful, regime change as a core instrument of Washington's foreign policy. In other words, it signals a potential shift away from things like diplomacy and sanctions and a move toward direct military action.
And you see that echoed here by the Atlantic Council, which frames it as the official launch of this new doctrine. The message couldn't be clearer. The Trump Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine is officially in effect. It's basically a declaration of a much more muscular, interventionist America, right in its own backyard.
So how might other countries react? This is where analysts start getting really concerned about the ripple effects. Could Russia see this as a green light for so-called decapitation strikes against leadership in Ukraine? Could China feel pressured to speed up its own timeline for a move on Taiwan? For America's adversaries, this action creates a profound sense of insecurity. It basically erases that long-held belief that being a head of state gives you protection from being captured by a foreign military.
Which leaves us with one last massive question. The capture of Nicolás Maduro was, by all accounts, a clear tactical success. But the strategic fallout? That is far from certain. In a world where a president can be arrested by a foreign army, has the playbook for international conflict been rewritten for good?